Good evening, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums today. Once again in the co-captain's chair, Mr. Steven Reid, also from Sea of Tranquility. What's happening, my friend? How are you?
I'm good. Yes, excellent. I'm looking forward to doing a very varied selection this evening for me, morning, afternoon, evening, all times. Who cares? You can watch it whenever you want, you know?
That's right. That's the great thing about YouTube. We're always on demand, right? So,
Always,
absolutely. Well,
yes. Yeah.
we're going to talk about a band that has been asked for by tons of people over the last year, whatever. It's a band that I always kind of liked on the periphery. I never had all of their releases. I had like the mandatory popular ones. Since we got started getting asked so much about Roxy Music, I went out and filled out the rest of my catalog. So I have all of the CDs of their entire discography. And I got to say, I'm just going to throw it out there right now because I like to be honest with everybody watching. I'm not the biggest Roxy Music fan. I don't mind them. I like some of their music. Honestly, I don't find any of their albums like classics. I find that I like some of their material. I don't like some of the material. Some of them just doesn't do a lot for me. They're a little light for me, I guess. I'm not always a big fan of Brian Ferry's vocals. There are times where I really can't stand his vocals on some of these albums. There are other times he sounds perfectly fine and I like him. I think Phil Manzanera is a great guitar player. I don't hear enough of him on here. I love Eddie Jobson when he was in the band. I don't hear enough of him either. Brian Eno, everybody loves him, right? He's all over the early stuff. Some of this stuff is a little kind of really poppy and like synth pop, that sort of thing. Not there's anything wrong with that. I just want to throw it out there to everybody right off the bat that while I don't mind Roxy Music, I'm not a huge fan. Okay. But in saying that, I found it fairly easy to rank this catalog. So now that I said all that, do you have anything to add before we dive right in?
I think we're done. Are we finished? No, I'm only joking.
I know what I just said is going to probably upset a lot of people, and it's like, and that's okay. We can't love every band. I don't dislike them.
Fun.
Yeah.
That's half the fun. That's half the fun. Let's upset people. No, I'll be honest as well and say there's some of this I love and there's some of this I don't. I've been fortunate because most of what we've covered, if not everything of what we've covered before, I have a real love for, a real affinity with. And with Roxy Music, there's some of this here that dates back to my very early years, probably pre me really being into music, because my father had some of these on cassette many, many years ago. Very inappropriate album covers to show to somebody the age that I was listening to music back then, not really understanding.
They got away with a lot of those album covers. That's the crazy thing, right? Yeah.
You know, and to go off at a tangent before we've even started, somebody who I mentioned that we were going to be doing this to has said, "Oh, I think you should rank the album covers as well." And I thought, well, I don't like any of them.
The ladies look great on them, right?
The ladies look great. I'm not saying that I don't appreciate the female form. That's not what we're saying here. But as album covers, would they make me go? Yeah, they would make me pick them out and go, okay, let's keep going. And that's a personal thing. There you go. They don't excite me in that sense. So yeah, this is going to be an interesting one because I think that there's an awful lot of ground covered here. If nothing else, progressive rock, are they prog? I would argue no. I don't think they're really prog at any stage, but progressive music should be wide and varied. It should be eclectic and it shouldn't be frightened to try different things. Right. So arguably they're more progressive than a lot of prog.
Yeah.
Arguably.
Yeah, I mean, this band has gotten...
People may agree or disagree.
Yeah, like over the years, it's like, are they a prog band? Are they a glam band? Are they a pop band? Are they? I don't think they're any of them, right? They just kind of like, they're like Roxy Music. There's really nobody sounds like them. You got to give them a lot of credit. And I will say, a very different band that probably deserves all the accolades just for being so damn different and such like an enigma. To me, it's almost kind of like a lot of David Bowie's music. Like you really can't like pigeonhole any of it. You can't classify any of it. But a lot of people really love it. And I could definitely, you listen to this catalog, very influential because there's a lot of other bands, especially that came out in the 80s, that no doubt grabbed a ton from these guys. Whether I really love them or not, that really doesn't matter. Their place in music history, I think, is very important. So I'll give them that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point as well, because I do think that they influenced a huge amount of 80s music, but not necessarily a huge amount of 80s music that we would talk about here.
Right.
So it is interesting that they've obviously, because as you say, there have been a huge amount of people that have requested this. I even just reading, lots of comments and videos that I've not been involved in, they consistently come up as a band that say, oh, when's Roxy Music going to get covered? So that shows groundbreakers, I think, more than anything else. And I think that they obviously grabbed people's imagination in a way that nobody else was, because as you say, they sound, even although what happens at the start to what happens at the end, it sounds like two different bands. It all sounds like Roxy Music.
Yeah.
Now, that's maybe an awful lot to do with the vocals, to be fair, because as you say, an awful lot of the elements are not buried, but I think they're maybe more subdued than I think that with the standard of musician that was involved, you would expect. But they're a band that I think are more about a vibe and a feel and an atmosphere. There's a lot of melancholy involved in this. And where we do differ, I think, quite distinctly is I really like Brian Ferry's voice. And I've seen him solo a couple of times in more recent years, to be fair. And they've both times the show was absolutely phenomenal. And he was quite daring, especially for someone that you would class now as more of an older singer, and most guys of that sort of vintage are in a position where they're kind of hiding their voices. Well, the first time that we went to see him, he actually opened the show just him on stage with a piano, and it built from there. And every 2 or 3 songs, there were more and more musicians would join the band on stage. I think we ended up with something like 13 musicians on stage, and it became an event by the end of it. But the way that the show was built was phenomenal, and the way that his voice has aged was quite incredible, to be fair. And that's something I think that really, I don't think he gets credit for. And the last time I saw him on anything was a German show called Babylon Berlin. And it was set round about just pre-Second World War. And obviously he's got that kind of affinity with that scene and various things like that. And he's done a lot of his solo stuff has kind of involved that sort of feel and kind of lounge music, I suppose I would maybe class it as. It was incredible just to see him, how well he fitted straight into something that arguably had nothing to do with what you would anticipate. So a very, I think, kind of genre bending band and singer. And interesting that I'm already talking about Roxy Music and it'll upset people as Brian Ferry, because they're really not. But still, in many ways, he's the one that comes out of it with that reputation, I think.
Yeah, true. And yeah, as far as his vocals, I mean, there are albums and songs that I think he sounds fantastic. And there are other times I'm kind of like, but that's just me. Anyway.
I think a lot of people do, but he's polarizing. Right, so
he's got one of those, and in our next episode, we're going to talk about another singer who kind of affects me the same way. All right. And that's Alex Hart.
Right, okay.
But more about that in the next episode. So I'm going to have Steve kick us off with his number 8 pick here.
So I'm going to start with my Manifesto. That's what I'm going to start with. So this was 1979. This is the band's sixth studio album. And it was a comeback after Brian Ferry started to get into a kind of a solo career that moved things into more of that kind of pop, lounge, art sort of style, a bit of jazz and various things like that, which I think he's very good at, I have to say. I think Manifesto feels like a compromise. There's an east side and a west side if you get the old-fashioned vinyl, which obviously my CD here is trying to ape. I don't know if you can see that or not very well. And the east side kind of links things to what had come before. You've got Manifesto itself, which is a bit wild and weird. There's kind of long instrumental passages on there. There's trash. I find that's interesting. But then once we move on to the west side, it's a bit of a struggle for me, to be honest with you. And I don't think there's much connection to what the band arguably were about, in my opinion. Dance Away was a massive hit, to be fair. Interestingly, you've got people in the band, I use band, air quotes, as I've said before, nobody likes them. But you've got people in the band like Paul Carrick, who we'll know from Mike and the Mechanics, and a long solo kind of white soul sort of era. and Gary Tibbs, I think he was a bassist in Adam and the Ants. So a kind of interesting collection of people there, and they were basically a three-piece by that stage. So Manifesto doesn't do very much for me, to be honest with you, and it's clearly my number 8 by quite a distance.
Well, I'm right there with you. Manifesto number 8. Yeah, it's almost like they're just trying to find their way in this weird time, the end of the 70s. You know, you got here in the States, you got disco and pop is all the rage. Punk is kind of done. New wave is coming. And you get a little bit of all that here. And yeah, I mean, half the album, or at least a third of the album, seems like it's aimed for the clubs, right?
Yep.
Little hints of disco and soul and pop, and done well, I think. Is that really what you want to hear from this band? I don't know. And you know, you mentioned Trash. That's kind of, to me, real cutesy synth pop. It's okay. You know, Cry 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 is another song really aimed at the charts, I think. And I think Ferry's vocals are very kind of theatrical and like extravagant on this album. I think that's kind of what they were going for. Still Falls the Rain is kind of funky. I like that. Stronger Through the Years is kind of a cool tune. But yeah, for the most part, I don't know. This to me just doesn't really work as an album that I would go back to, let alone a Roxy Music album.
Yeah, very much so. So number 7 for me, and I'm still in the same era here because this is the one that followed it up. So this is Flesh and Blood. So we're into the 80s now. And arguably, I suppose they are setting the scene, because this is very 80s. And considering how early we are in the decades, I mean, they're obviously making a massive impact on what's going to come, because it's really quite, I think, not sterile, but it's got that 80s clinicalness about it. It feels quite calculated to me. I think there's some stuff here like Same Old Scene has got more character to it. I quite like that. Strange Days adds a bit more intrigue. And I think that it's clear that Ferry is loving this. I think he's great on this album, even though I don't necessarily like it all that much. It's much stronger than Manifesto for me, and I can happily put this on. And there are occasions where I will put this on, but it does become a little bit more of a background album for me. It's not something I'm going to put on and just solely, you know, it's a night for music, let's put on Flesh and Blood. It's well, that's quite a nice mood album, I'll go and do something else while this plays. That's not the most ringing endorsement ever, has to be said, but I quite like this, but it doesn't blow me away, to be honest.
Gotcha. Well, more about that in a minute. I might upset some people here with this one, and I totally get it. I'm going to go with their debut from 1972.
Okay.
This is like one of those albums that I want to love because it's like all over the place and it's kind of eclectic, and I don't. You know, we got Brian Eno's on here. He's got doing a lot of stuff on here with arranging, songwriting, and adding in all his kind of cool, VCS3 synth soundscapes all over the place, which is kind of neat. Ladytron is kind of like jazz rock and prog, if you can call this prog, right? That's a cool tune. If There Is Something is more like kind of like a bluesy tune, kind of almost reminds me of Traffic a little bit in a weird way. Then you got the Bob is this kind of like avant-garde pop, I guess. Chance Meeting, it's got loads of like kind of synths all over the place. Sea Breeze, again, kind of along the similar lines. I don't know. I mean, it's got some really cool Manzanera guitar solos, which, you know, quite frankly, I don't hear enough of on any of these albums. For me, the reason why this is so low, and again, I don't hate it, don't dislike it really. It's all over the place. And I listen to this and I haven't a clue who Roxy Music is all about, which I think we would get more of on subsequent releases. But, and, you know, I mean, yeah, this album cover is just, it's like, this is probably the worst album cover, Manifesto, but this isn't much better. But yeah, so I really like struggled with where to put that album. And when it comes down to it, as I'll talk about after your next pick, I think I like it less than my next one on the list, which is number 6. So back to you.
Well, my guess is that people who've been asking for this for a long time are now going, why are these guys doing this? But that's not the point.
Yes, where you got it, right? It's like, you know, you can't love every single band. You can know a catalog fairly well and not really love it. And that's what it comes down to, right?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, from here on in, I like all of these albums now, to be fair. From here on in, I like all of this. I think that there's what we're left with now is a bit more idiosyncratic. I think that certainly the two that I've ranked bottom, so Manifesto and Flesh and Blood, I mean, it couldn't be anybody because Roxy Music only sound like Roxy Music for a variety of reasons, to be fair. I think the production was a lot to do with that, but also I think Brian Ferry was a lot to do with that too, to be fair. But I do think that you can lump it in on maybe some hits from the eras, if that makes sense. It would maybe go on a compilation album, what I've kind of done there before. From here on in, for me, for all the rest of the albums in the catalogue, I think that they kind of stand out a little bit more than that, to be fair. A little bit more character about them. And it sounds, to me, this now sounds like Roxy Music and nobody else. So this is the last album with John Gustafsson on bass, who we all know from bands like the Mersey Beats, Hard Stuff, Bullet. I think he was in the Ian Gillan band when they were kind of still doing a bit of the jazz sort of thing as well.
Yep,
Eddie Jobson on synths, so that's, people know him obviously from UK. Jethro Tull for about, I don't know, a year or so in around there. And I think there's a good balance here with the kind of art side and the disco side. I mean, you've got Love is a Drug and things like that. And I suppose for a lot of people, these are hits, do you know? But I love that song, to be fair, do you know? And it will stick in my mind. Yeah. And I'm going to sing it for a long time after it's finished. And you can't ask for much more of that from a song, to be fair. Just Another High, I think Ferry's just out there on that. And I like that. I really like his vocals, to be fair. I know a lot of people are a bit hum-ho with him, but I really like his vocals. Whirlwind is punchy, Both Ends Burning. That kind of, it locks into place for me. It's. I think a lot of Roxy stuff's kind of out there to some extent. Yeah, the latter years to me become tamer. That doesn't mean it's all bad, but it becomes tamer. At this stage, I think we're 1975, I think this is the fifth album. I still think that there's a wild side to the band that I don't think many people could replicate, to be fair. And that's why, although they influenced a lot of people, I don't think you'll ever listen to anybody else and think, oh, well, that sounds like Roxy Music.
True.
And that's an interesting thing for me because there is a clear influence in so much of the 80s scene in what they did, but there's still nobody ever sounds like Roxy Music. So I like Siren, I have to say. This is, for me, it gets good now, to be honest.
Yeah, that is a good album. More about that in a little bit. My number 6, I'm going to go with Flesh and Blood from 1980. So interestingly enough, you know, this and Manifesto were done fairly close to each other. And
yep.
Manifesto doesn't work for me, and this actually does. I think this is how you make a early 80s light pop record with lots of great melodies, catchy hooks. You know, the instrumentation is very laid back and there's nothing like real energetic going on here, but it's okay. And I think there's just some really good songs on here. Over You, Same Old Scene. I think their remake of The Byrds' 8 Miles High is terrific.
Yeah, that is good, actually. Yeah, I agree with that, to be fair.
I love the synths on Rain, Rain, Rain. No Strange Delight is cool. I love the title track. And on this album, I think you hit on it before, this is one of my favorite vocal performances from Brian Ferry. I think he sounds amazing on this album.
Yeah.
So there you have it. So really weird how this one singer can instill like totally different opinions for me, depending on the album.
Yeah, I mean, he really is. He's a singer that's not frightened just to be him. There's lots of people who, you know, pull from scenes and ideas. And okay, yeah, I mean, he's really style-wise, you can see he's going back to the 40s. He's going back to the 20s.
Yeah.
He's doing things that nobody else was adding into pop music, never mind rock music, never mind art rock. That's a phrase that's used a lot for them. Yeah, I think art rock sometimes is maybe a little bit of a cop-out. That's sometimes used, I think, because we don't quite know what to call it, to be fair, because...
Yeah, I mean, that's like them and 10cc, and yeah, it's like, well, Supertramp, like, they're not really prog, they're kind of pop, they're not really rocking, like, what the hell, they're artful, right? So art rock.
Yeah. So, because to me, it doesn't really describe the sound of what they do, but I can understand why people use it, to be fair. And I suppose they are arty in that sense. It is quite picturesque music. It is telling stories. They're definitely a band that tells stories, I think, you know, musically, never mind the fact that Ferry's lyrics are setting scenes and telling stories. There are some, I was waiting to say there's no throwaway songs. That's not true. That's overplaying his lyrics a little bit. There are some throwaway moments, but he does tend to kind of give you something to think about, to be fair. And I think that's also true on So I'm on Stranded with number 5. So we're into 1973. This is the third album. So this is the first one with Jobson, so without Brian Eno. And that was obviously going to be quite a big change for them because nobody else is Eno in that sense. And I like a lot of his solo stuff. As you say, I think that he's arguably was finding his way with Roxy Music, even though he's a massive influence on those first 2 albums. And what he does more in a sense after that, well, I mean, he had a free reign, so that obviously was going to, play a massive part in it. I like Stranded, I have to say. Jobson, to me, is way too much in the shadows here, only because we know what he can do,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. I don't think you listen to this and think, oh, well, what a waste. But I think knowing what you can do outside of this, you think, well, what a waste. Do you know? But that's kind of bringing another aspect into it as opposed to just what you're hearing here. So it's quite a departure from the first 2 albums. It's not prog, it's not art, it's not hard rock, and this is maybe the issue that we're having here. Is same again. It's one of those bands where people who talk about music and write reviews, you have to kind of pigeonhole a little bit. You have to kind of put things in a genre to try and give people an idea who, especially when you're writing a review, you've got to try and convey some idea of what it is you're actually talking about. It's not very easy with Roxy Music, it has to be said. And even going and kind of doing a little bit of research and things to be able to talk a little bit more about these, you read reviews, nobody else can really agree on exactly who they are and what they sound like. And it's a massive compliment, to be fair. To me, the biggest difference here is that suddenly they sounded organised. Maybe that's what Jobson brought, is they sounded organised. We're much more, the first album, yeah, that's wild. I don't really have an issue with that, to be fair, that it is wild. It's out there. And then it does get more, song-based and I think there's a bit more craft involved, if that maybe makes sense. But by this stage, we're doing songs, and that's maybe the first album we did. Songs, I think there's a lot to like on here. Just like you, Ferry's, I mean, these vocals are languid, I would say, on that. That's could be seen as a criticism. I don't think so, personally. I think the song works for that. Street Life, that's a really good opener. They are a band that like to open an album well. Not all 8 have that, but most of them. I think there's about 6 of them that you think they've probably put the best song right up front, and they like to close an album well too. They leave you with something to think, oh wow, I might just go and put that on again. And that's a lesson that a lot of bands could maybe take from too. Serenade is a bit shorter, but it's a sublime track. I like that a lot. And Mother of Pearl was shown that they were still doing a lot of varied stuff at that stage. I think that there are a lot of things there that kind of maybe hark to what had come before. There's still a daring band here. So number 5 for me, it's Stranded.
It's my number 5 as well.
There you
go. How about that album cover, ladies and gentlemen?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, she's beautiful. Don't get me wrong, right?
Yeah, I know, right? I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I like this album. I agree with you. I think it's a little more straightforward, and I think that works. As far as, can we credit Jobson with that? I have no idea. I mean, it's just weird because his playing on these albums is very different than what he did in Curved Air or Frank Zappa or UK. It's, or Jethro Tull even. But I mean, it just goes to show that he can adapt in pretty much any band. So, yeah, I mean, Street Life, you mentioned, that's a really memorable song. It's got lots of good guitar work from Phil Manzanera on it, which I dig. Amazon is a cool kind of dreamy song. You got Psalm, which I think is a really cool hypnotic type of track, a little different from them. You mentioned the catchy Serenade. I think Mother of Pearl is a great rock song from these guys, and I just wish they did a little bit more of that, because I would be on board for that.
Can't agree, can't.
Yeah.
And they maybe don't often, not for my taste personally. I think that there's so much more they could have, added to that, because they can drive a song in a way that a lot of bands can't, but they choose not to quite often.
Yeah, and then that's okay. I mean, that's their thing.
So
I think it's a good album. Again, I don't mind his vocals on this album. Yeah, the only time his vocals really bug me, and I don't even know what to call it. He does this kind of warbly thing where he tries to get really theatrical and over the top, and it's just I hear that and I'm like, ugh, man. But he doesn't do it all the time, thankfully. But just enough where it can annoy me at times. But
as I say, I mean, his vocals do, for people who don't like him, that's the thing. They don't like the over the topness, the kind of the vibrato that's there that arguably doesn't need to be. See, hearing him do it live, it just clicked for me. And actually, I walked away from it thinking, I need to actually maybe go and reappraise some of the stuff that he's done. And that opened my eyes, to be fair. I'll be honest and say, when I went to see him solo the first time, it was actually someone that said, do you want to go and see Brian Ferry? And I thought, well, that sounds like a good night out. I'll go along to that. And I walked away thinking, wow, okay, hold on a minute. That was really good. And that's what a good gig should do, right? Isn't it? If you're going along because you think that this will be a good night out and somebody else is, passionate and desperately wants to go, I'll go along, we'll have fun, it's live music, it's going to be good. And I walked out thinking, yeah, right, okay, I need to go and investigate an awful lot more of this. And I've bought some of his solo stuff too. That to me is a little bit more hit and miss, it has to be said, when he's good. And I probably prefer him solo-wise when he really pulls it back in and does go a bit jazzy and does get really dark. But when he does the kind of more pop shimmer sort of stuff, it's good and he's good at it, but it's not necessarily what I would choose to listen to. Has to be said. And ironically, then I'm going to go from album number 4, Pop Shimmer. I'm going to go to Avalon because, well, that's a pop shimmer, is what that is. To be fair, I really like this album. I have to say, Avalon was one of the ones that I knew from many moons ago, and there's an awful lot of it, to be fair, that you were going to know whether you liked Roxy music or not. To be fair, because this album is pretty much everywhere for a long time.
Yeah.
More than this, Avalon, Take a Chance with Me, great songs. There's a real ability to put together just an excellent, memorable, hooky sort of song that isn't just run of the mill. It's not just pop music. That I can go with the art rock here, even though we've moved far from where we were at the start, because it is pop. It's not pop. It is rock. It's really not rock. I really like Avalon, to be fair. I actually wrote down it transcends genre. That sounds very highfalutin, it has to be said. I may be overplaying it a bit there, but it's clearly, it is what it is, but it's not what it is. And I really like that about Avalon. It's an album, when I came to do this, I just presumed that the last era, once they got back together again, would all be lumped at the bottom, because in my head that was kind of like, well, far away from the sort of stuff I normally listen to now. So pulling this back out and listening to it, because I have neglected it for a long time, I thought, wow, that's really quite good, to be fair. So I like
Avalon. Well, yeah, it holds up very well.
Yeah, it almost pushed higher, I have to say, in the list, but I just couldn't get it any higher because I liked the 3 albums I got above it.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, we'll talk about Avalon again in a minute, but number 4 for me is For Your Pleasure. Another good album from 1973. Again, you got more ladies on the front. They love picking out models, and
I like that cover, to be fair. That
well,
one I like that
because there's more to it, and it's hard to see, but she's got like what is it, a panther down there on the leash?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this one, that's the only one that I look at. Maybe Flesh and Blood, actually, because it's quite a clinical album cover, to be fair. But that's the only one I look at and think that kind of tells me what's happening on the album.
Right, because I love the Avalon album cover, but it doesn't really kind of embody
that to me. That's. I mean, I immediately think Argus, Wishbone Ash, personally, when I see that. That's where it takes me. So it takes me to that kind of rock but prog that Wishbone Ash were just utterly superb and still are, to be fair, whichever version you want to listen to. And that album cover takes me there, which is not what's happening inside, to be fair.
Right, exactly, yeah. But yeah, this has that kind of this is like a bright, energetic, kind of slick album, right? Here, you have lots of. I like Brian Eno's kind of layerings and electronics that are kind of bubbling all over this album. I think this album really works for me, whereas the first album kind of doesn't. I think it's all starting to come into play here. Do the Strand is kind of jazzy, right? It's kind of like this quirky pop jazz piece. Here you got Perry's falsettos, or Ferry's falsetto, I should say, which, again, love it or not, whatever. Beauty Queen, good soulful pop song, I think, with some really nice electric piano. Strictly Confidential is a really, really cool song on here because it kind of reminds me of like 70s Van der Graaf Generator mixed with a little 80s Marillion, the Fish era, which obviously way before that actually happened.
Way before, yeah.
Right? So you have to wonder, was Mr. Derek Dick listening to some Brian Ferry earlier on when he was younger? I don't know.
Could it be? I would be surprised if he wasn't, to be fair. That would make sense to me with knowing what else Fish listened to over the years. I would imagine that some Roxy music slipped in there at times.
Yeah, I mean, we know he was listening to Peter Hamill and Van der Graaf Generator. We know that. So
Yes, absolutely. And we know he was listening to the next band we'll talk about too.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A lot of good Manzanera guitar work on this album, I think. Additions of You is actually a pretty up-tempo rocker song, right? Got some kind of screaming sax and whatnot going on there. And Every Dream Home, A Heartache is also another good song on here. So I like this album. I think this album works for me. This is like, it's my number 4, so obviously it's upper echelon Roxy music, but I think this is where they really kind of figured out what they were all about, what they were going to do. Yeah.
Absolutely. So number 3 for me, and this is one of the ones that I was introduced to when I was, well, yay high. And that is Country Life. Okay, so this had an impact on me in more ways than one. Interesting album cover to be looking at that age and appreciating it for its art, I would suggest. That's what I was doing at that stage when I was, goodness knows how old I was. Well, I certainly didn't look at the album cover when it first came out, because I'll give away my age now. I was 1 when this came out, so there you go. So it was a little further down the line than that, but we're not talking all that far. When I kind of thought, yeah, right, okay, fair enough. That's interesting. I don't have those things. But anyway, so this, to me, and I'll give away, well, everyone's worked out what's in my top 2. This is the best non-Eno album for me by quite a distance. I really like Country Life. And I think that Manzanera hits a groove in this album that he doesn't necessarily everywhere else, and none more so in The Thrill of It All. I think that's probably one of his stronger statements with a band. Really like that track, really like his work on it. Jobson's violin on Out of the Blue, and I like the production on that song as well. It kind of takes you a different place entirely. Bittersweet, that's daring. I think there's like probably got an oompa section in there, so we're still kind of doing some crazy stuff, which I like, and especially when I was young, I was kind of like, what is this? Which probably stuck with me all these years. I still like music that stops me on the tracks and makes me go, excuse me. So I quite like that too, to be fair. Prairie Rose, that's a really excellent. So as I said, I like to close an album well too, and that's a really good closer. And this is an album, I mean, obviously this is a remastered one that I've bought, but I've had, I think, 3 or 4 different versions of this. I probably still have somewhere the cassette that I listened to many, many years ago, which I doubt plays properly now because it's been given a lot of coverage over the years. So yeah, I like Country Life. To me, we're at a stage now where I can understand now why people are asking for Roxy music being covered, because this and the 2 I've got left were top notch now.
Yeah, I like that album too. More about that in a minute. I'm going to go number 3, Avalon.
Yep.
It's this album was doing big business when I was 16 years old, 1982. And there's a reason why. And I do want to mention, because I normally don't say this, I'm usually kind of the antithesis of hit singles, but this band had a lot of great singles. I mean, most of the hit songs that this band churned out are pretty damn good. I don't always say that, but yeah, with this band, I totally agree. But great melodies all throughout this album. It's definitely, like you mentioned, more of kind of like a synth pop type of album. It's not very rocking or anything like that, but kind of like with Flesh and Blood, I don't mind it. Here, it really, really works. I think, as a latter period album for them, More Than Words is a terrific pop song.
That's a great song. Yep.
It's just a really, really great song. The space between has this kind of like jazzy tone, which I really dig a lot. The title track is really cool. A lot of lush synthesizers. I like the female backing vocals on that song as well.
Yeah, that's true.
While My Heart Is Still Beating, again, kind of go in that jazzy kind of synth pop realm, which I think really works. The Main Thing is great. Take a Chance With Me is also a fantastic song. So I dig this album a lot, regardless of whether the cover does not depict the music contained within at all. It's okay. Good album. Good album.
It's an interesting point you make about the single, because they're a band who, I think, right across the whole catalogue, even when they are doing music that arguably is more mainstream, more commercial, realistically from track 1 to the end, I don't think any of those albums really, maybe Avalon does, but I'm not convinced any of them really are middle of the road, mainstream kind of, mass appeal albums. And yet they managed to do that with a lot of the albums because they've shifted a huge amount of units over the years. But the singles, I think, are something that you could imagine, as I say, well, back in the day, my mum and dad listening to them. But the rock crowd could still, I think, without any kind of guilt go, yeah, this is really good. And that's quite unusual. Do you know, I don't think there was any guilt about people going, you know, well, I like some wild and wacky prog, I like some hard rock, but I'm really digging what Roxy Music are doing right now. And that's I think that's a really massive compliment to them, because they're all of those things and none of those things. Keep going back to that.
Yeah,
And
they sit in a
that's,
really weird chasm, like in the middle of everything, and yet
yeah.
it's not.
But often bands, when we say, well, they're prog, but they're not prog enough, or they're rock, but they're not rock enough, we've often sat down and said, well, that's why they didn't make it. That's why they weren't popular. That's why they're a niche band. And that's why there's only you, me, and a few thousand people, you know, talking about these bands. Roxy Music, household names, do you know? And the singles, certainly from a certain era and a certain age of person now, everybody knows these songs.
Yeah.
Do you know? And that's transcending genre, I have to say. And you've got to take your hat off to them for that, because not many bands can do it. Certainly not many bands are still looked upon now as the real deal.
Yeah.
You know? So
Exactly.
So my number 2 is the debut. And it's high for exactly the reason that it's so low in yours. Is I love putting on this album with a pair of headphones on and just going, what the hell? You know? I don't think there's any doubt that this is a band who are finding their way, right? I think if they had an idea, let's just put it on. Let's just see how it flies, see where it goes. Would I call it daring? Yes. Would I call it naive? Yeah, that's maybe unkind, to be fair. I think, because I do think that they kind of know what they're doing here. I love the fact that there seems to be no fear. It's not calculated in any shape or form. I think that, you know, the oboe and the sax on this album, which is an element that not many bands would bring. Mackay's excellent on this. I just think that he's throwing it all in there, but it's not just for show. It all fits. Eno is not as adventurous as we know he will be or can be, but he is, you know, I think pushing at boundaries within songs. You can almost feel a fight for control. Do you know who's going to rule Roxy Music from here on in? We all know who won, but realistically, I think you can kind of feel that battle on here, and I like that battle. I mean, I've spoken before that to me, the guitars and the keyboards in a band should have a conversation, and they should talk, and they should sometimes argue. But to me here, quite often, I think all the elements are happily not getting on. But I really like the end result. I must admit that if I put it on and just put it on loud in a room, it does kind of get lost a little bit. Put the cans on and shut your eyes, and I get lost in myself, I have to say it. And I really like it. I just think that there's remake, remodel, another great opener, which as I say, they do really well. Ladytron's an excellent song. 2HB I really like as well. I actually like all of this from top to bottom. And I just think that, yeah, it's not going to be something I put on when I've got friends round, because undoubtedly it's going to insist that it overtakes everything you want to talk about or discuss or whatever it is. Do you know that Roxy's in the room, so you're going to listen to Roxy, and probably most people are going to go and turn that off. Because it's not that sort of album. It's not an album to sit down with your friends and have a chat about and whatever. But I kind of like the fact that it's a bit belligerent. It just kind of goes, nah, that is what it is. And you either run with it or you don't. Well, I run with it every time. I like it a lot. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that's an album that I should really like a lot. And I just don't know why I don't.
I'll be honest and say I was surprised it fell so low, because, I mean, obviously I know an awful lot of what you like, Peter. And to me, it ticks so many boxes of what I would have expected you to say, well, this is why I like it. But it's funny how music just touches us all differently. That's what makes it so exciting and interesting.
Yeah. I tried. Like I said, I agree with it. It's like when I was putting this list together, I'm like, why is it I can't put this any higher? I'm like, I just, I don't know. I want to love the album because it's got all the things that I love about a lot of bands, right? I don't know. Whatever,
That's how it works. So that's
how the needle drops, right? Yeah.
That's it. Rank them how you like them. And I love that phrase, because never a truer word said. There can be no wrong ranking, because you rank them how you like them.
Yeah. Just like my number 2 is Siren.
Oh, no, we don't.
I mean, I like this a lot. This has always been one of my favorite Roxy Music albums. This is one of the first ones I ever got, and I dig this a lot. I do want to mention, man, John Gustafson's bass playing on these albums is just absolutely great. He's such a great player. Now that I said that, Love is a Drug and Whirlwind. I mean, any album that has those two songs on it, I'm going to like. I think those are both great. She Sells got some great Jobson keyboards on it. I love McCary's sax on this album. I think this is just a really cool mix of kind of like jazz and pop and art rock, whatever you want to call it. Could It Happen to Me kind of sounds like the Beatles almost a little bit, like they're kind of doing
there's that element in there.
Both Ends Burning, top shelf Roxy music. I love that song a lot. That to me, Both Ends Burning, when I think of like, all right, art rock, when people say, oh, they're an art rock band, I think, oh, does it sound like Both Ends Burning? So right there, you got like three of my absolute favorite Roxy music songs on this album. Just Under the High is a really cool song as well. I don't know. I like this a lot. I almost made this my number one. Almost.
Right, okay.
Not quite, but almost.
So my number one, I think, is probably, I'm not going to say for most Roxy fans, because that's unfair, because we'll find out below, which is always fun to read after we've finished. But I think that this is probably the one that gets most love. And for me, I can see why. And really, I'm going to say three words, and it's Do the Strand, because I love that song. I must admit that the version that's on Viva, the live album that's around about this era, wow, that's intense. I mean, I really like that as a live album, I have to say. I don't know if it gets a lot of love or not, but I just think that it's a very heady experience. It's a sort of album that I can put on, and if there's somebody else in the house, they'll come through and they'll say, not necessarily approvingly, who's this? You know, because it's for a band that are not a heavy rock band, it's loud and it's uncompromising. But there are some decisions that are taken when albums are put together. I know I'm talking about For Your Pleasure, but I'm really talking about Viva here. See if when Do the Strand closes that album and it just bang closes and then echoes out, and there's no crowd noise, you're no longer at the gig, you're not in the venue. I love that. Somebody made that decision. That's how we're going to close that album. We're going to leave you with a completely different experience from what you expect. There's no adulation. There's no, you don't know they're taking their bows at the end. It's like they've thrown it all down and walked off stage and everyone just left. And I love that. But anyway, I'm talking about For Your Pleasure. Well, I kind of am. But I like everything about this album. It's still daring. It's not as daring as the debut. It's maybe more daring than the debut because it's got a lot of those elements, but they are now trying to pack them into songs. They're trying to kind of make statements now.
I think for me, the songs are stronger.
Yes, the songs are song-based now. If that makes sense. It's not I wouldn't say the battle's over, because I still think that there are elements here that are trying to say, listen to me, no, listen to me, no, I'm in charge, no, I'm in charge. I like that element here, I have to say. And it's interesting because I think there's things like Addition of You, which, and I've said it's Mackay and Manzanera that kind of dominate there. Beauty Queen, it's all about Ferry's vocals. And as I've gone through those tracks and I've listened to this album, and I've listened to this album a lot again in recent times, it's one of those ones that I thought I better give it another listen to make sure that this is going to go where I think it's going to go. And found myself losing a couple of hours because I put it on again and I put it on again and I put it on again. You know, and that's a big compliment for any album, it has to be said. But I think there's a lot of individual performances here that stand out on certain tracks. And interestingly, it's Eno that seems to be compromised an awful lot on it. He seems to end up, as you say, layering and kind of building foundations and setting the scene. He's doing all the important work, but he doesn't necessarily get that moment to come out from behind there, you know. And I think it's a strength of the album, but it, arguably didn't work after there because things went differently. But right. I really like this album, I have to say. I personally struggle to find a weak moment on it, to be honest with you. So I really like For Your Pleasure, and I think that along with probably Country Life, this and Country Life, if you've never listened to Roxy music, and I think probably most people have, that's where I would start personally, because I think you're getting most aspects. Avalon as well as maybe the other one. That would be the three, because you're kind of covering the bases with those. But yeah, For Your Pleasure, really like it. Excellent album.
Cool. Yeah, it's a good one. I agree. But my number one, had to go with the one with the, the cover that when I was a kid was like, ooh, I don't know who the hell Roxy Music is, but I certainly like that album cover.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah. Anyway, back to the album.
Yes, yeah. There's music on there too, Peter.
Yeah, there is. I almost forgot.
Yeah.
I mean, this and Siren are, almost neck and neck with me. But this has got. I love the lineup. Obviously, my top two have the same lineup, band lineup. I would have loved to have seen Roxy Music around this time with this lineup here. I think "Thrill of It All" is just a great song. Got Jobson and Manzanera doing some really cool stuff in that. 3 and 9, kind of jazzy. You got Andy McKay contributing all sorts of great sax. All I Want Is You is absolutely gorgeous song, right?
Yeah, really is.
And I love his vocal on that. So I do like a lot of his vocals. There's just sometimes where I'm just like, the guy drives me crazy. Out of the Blue, I think you mentioned that. Really, really good song. Nice keyboards. Casanova and Prairie Rose. Prairie Rose has got this kind of like a little psychedelic feel to it, which is a little bit different for the band, but I think it just works really well, and it's a great album closer. So, for me, this one just inches out Siren. I think Siren has a couple songs that I think I like more than anything else from any other album, but I think top to bottom, for me, this is just a really good, engaging album, and it probably has the most enticing album cover out of all of them, even though it's really a terrible album cover when you think about it. But the man in me looks at that and says, "Ooh, pretty cool, right?"
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, going through these, it's interesting. How many bands can we cover that have done only 8 albums, which is quite a lot for a lot of bands, but only 8 albums, but so many different and distinct eras within those 8 albums. I really think that you've got your first 2, then I think you've got another 2 or 3, and then it kind of crosses over a little bit, and then you've got your final. I'm going to take Manifesto out of it because I just don't like it. But then you've got your final 2 where you kind of think, well, that's still the same band, still sounds the same, but doesn't sound like anything that came before, but does. I think it's an interesting catalogue to cover. It's been, I think, quite easy for me personally to rank them, but interesting to have not just lumped them all together in eras, or maybe I have actually, I don't know, but it's been a lot of fun doing it, I have to say, but quite difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to back up my statement from the beginning, so just to let everybody know, I do like Roxy Music. Just because I don't love them doesn't mean that I can't appreciate them. So I like a ton of other bands way more than I like Roxy, but they're a really interesting, intriguing band. They're just a little kind of off the beaten path from what I normally listen to, but I appreciate everything they've always done, and I do enjoy half of this catalog quite a bit, I would say, at least. And you never know, because I always say you never give up on any band as long as you kind of like them. If you ask me in 5 years from now, they may be one of my favorites. Who the hell knows? Because there have been because I will tell you that I really did not like these guys at all like 20, 30 years ago. So it's one of those bands that's slowly starting to, gain more appeal to me. And that's the joy of music, right? So
absolutely it is. Yes, absolutely it is.
So everybody watching, rank these albums as you like them in the comments below. It'll be really interesting to see how folks take to this catalog or have taken to this catalog. Do your top 5, all 8, whatever you like, and let's get some dialogue going about Roxy Music down below. So visit Stephen and I both on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. If you like what you see in here, there's a Ko-Fi link below in the album description where you can make a contribution or donation. We've also got the link to our merch page where you can grab one of these fantastic shirts, either the new design or the original logo, right, with the triangle and the all the good stuff on there. We got hoodies, we got shirts, all sorts of stuff. So and we got the link to the website as well. So stay tuned, guys, though, because we're coming right back in a little while. Going to do the same thing with the sensational Alex Harvey Band. So for Steven Reid, I am Pete Pardo. We'll see you guys then. Take care.